We had the government announce, of course, yesterday more money for aged care, the particular focus on home care places. Earlier I spoke to Aged Care Minister Richard Colbeck. Richard Colbeck, thanks for your time. So 10,000 extra home care places. Advocates are already saying it's not enough. What's your response?
Well, that's the immediate response to the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission talked to us about doing three things. One was putting some additional capacity into the home care market, which we've done, those 10,000 places. They talked to us about reducing and minimising the use of chemical restraint in particular and making that a use of last resort.
Yep.
And they talked about getting young people, particularly with disabilities, out of the aged care residential sector. So the announcement yesterday was specifically targeted at those three things that the Aged Care Royal Commission talked to us about. There's clearly more to do.
Yeah.
We know that the demand is strong. We've watched the demand grow as capacity's been put into the market over the last 6 years. So when we came to government, there were about 60,000 home care packages in the market. As of this year, there will be 150,000 home care packages in the market. And over the last 2 years, we've invested $44 million in home care packages $2.7 billion. $2.7 billion in 44,000 home care packages in the last 2 years. So that's a huge growth in the market.
On these places, yes, there's a lot more money going in there in more places. There's still a waiting list of 120,000. I guess it'll come down to 110. The last budget, there were advocates hoping for more places. The money apparently wasn't there. Now it is. Where was it found? Does this basically come off the surplus?
This is additional money that we're putting into the system. And obviously we're continuing to play the strong economic game that we have since we came to government, and we're being very cognisant of our core promises with respect to the budget. But this is additional funding. The Prime Minister, when he called the Royal Commission, and let's not forget Prime Minister Morrison called the Royal Commission as one of the first things that he did after coming to the leadership, which is a demonstration of how important we see this sector.
But despite that,
so we're watching the Royal Commission closely. We're taking notice of the things that they've said to us. We've acknowledged that there's more things to do, but we don't want to create, for example, with home care, another pink bat situation or vet fee help where you flood the market with capacity and then you create a whole heap of dodgy providers into the market.
But that potential was there last budget, and there were still pushes there to have more places. They weren't provided. Now they are. I'm just trying to establish, is it an urgency that's changed?
But that's a limit. Well, the Royal Commission talked to us about what we should do. We've responded to the Royal Commission with this immediate response, and it's only 3 weeks since the Royal Commission.
But the last budget wasn't that long ago.
Well, in the previous year's budget, we put $2.2 billion worth of home care packages in. So the year to the 30th of June this year, we increased the capacity of the market by 25%. We are gradually increasing the capacity of the market. We understand the demand. We understand that people's desire is to stay at home.
And advocates were saying last budget, please, we desperately need more places. They weren't.
But we also have to reform the way the system's operating.
I understand.
So that change has to occur.
But that reform hasn't happened between now and the last budget. You've just started to put extra places in.
We have announced some changes to the way that we'll be operating. So the way that we're paying the funds into the system will change. We talked about going from a payment in advance process to a payment in arrears process. That decision has been made and that will occur. We've put that extra capacity into the system. There is reform that needs to occur. The Royal Commission said that it wants to have some input into that process. What we need to work out now is how we continue with the reform while the Royal Commission continues, because I think it's important that reform process does proceed.
I think probably the most damning stat people are hearing is that 16,000 people died waiting to get a spot last year, a home care place. Would some of them be alive today if extra places had been made available?
Look, that's a really difficult question to speculate on, but it's important to note that 97% of those people that don't have a home care package allocated to them at the level that they've been assessed to have access to another form of care through, say, CHSP, but they also have access to the rest of the health system. So it's not as if they're out there completely on their own. They have access to the GPs, the rest of the Medicare system and the general health system and hospital system as well. So they have access to all of that. Yes, they haven't received the home care package that they've been allocated to at the level that they're looking for it, but they do have CHSP access. They have access to the rest of the healthcare system as well, and so it's not as if they're completely left on their own.
But that figure must make you uncomfortable as the Minister.
It makes everybody uncomfortable, and I think it's one of the more difficult things that's in the report. We want to remove the waiting list. We want to get the waiting time down. We've said
what to get down to 60 days?
60 to 90 days is what the industry has been talking about. I'm on the public record as saying I'd like to get it down to 60 days. This is going to take time.
What's the timeline for that? Because it's important, if you're going to set a goal, to say when you'll do it by.
Well, it will depend a little bit on some of the things that come out of the back of the Royal Commission. It's also going to depend on resourcing, and so there's all of those things that have to go into it. Right. I can't put, and I don't think it'd be responsible of me to make a commitment.
Will you put a time on it once you get the Royal Commission report back then, the full one back? There needs to be a time put it on at some stage, right?
We've said in the announcement yesterday that we want to put in place processes that get rid of the waiting list. That's our objective. So we want to do that. We want to get the waiting list down for access to the packages to that 60 to 90 day period. My preference is closer to 60. And these are all important things that we need to do coming out of this process. And then we have to have, alongside that, we'll have this huge other piece of work to do, which is the reform of the residential care system. And
in terms of those going into homes, you spoke yesterday about a structural change for the businesses. They are businesses themselves, the privately run ones. More people, but in lower level care. Does that explain why some are going out of business? Is it a failure to adapt?
Well, there's been enormous change in this sector over the last 30 years. And one of the criticisms of the Royal Commission is the way that governments, over that period of time, have basically tacked on and tinkered with the way that the system is structured. So we've commenced a number of things that are key structural reforms. The commencement of that process was coming off the back of the Carnell-Patterson report that talked about a single oversight agency. So we put in place, as from the 1st of January this year, the new Quality and Safety Commission. That has assisting that an advisory council that provides advice to both me and to the Commissioner around A, the toolkit, and B, how the Commission should operate. New quality standards, which came into place on the 1st of July this year, a new Residents' Charter of Rights, which also came into place on the 1st of July, and new standards and new regulations, that relate to the use of restraints. So there's a number of, and these are structural reforms. The Royal Commission talks about the potential of a new Aged Care Act, and I would suggest that that's probably a high possibility coming out of the back of the Royal Commission process, which means structurally reforming the way that it's legislated. And of course, I think that aged care will look quite different in perhaps a decade's time off the back of this process. And with those structural changes, and also I guess the other elements are just improving standards that you were referring to then, does that mean we'll be talking about anyone needing care in the future, the overall average price will be going up? Well, one of the things that's a feature of residential care, for example, is that people are coming in later. They're coming in with more comorbidities, and so therefore they need high levels of care. That's just a feature of the system. It's assisted by the fact that there's the availability of home care, and you've seen the occupancy rates of aged care facilities around the country drop on average from about 96-97% 6 years ago to about 90% now. That's having an input into their core viability because they require probably a higher level of occupancy. So people are in home care where they want to be and where there are better results. That's exactly right. So that's all good. So these structural changes are occurring in the industry now, and I think they will continue to change. But to put it in more blunt language, does that mean overall we're going to talk about higher costs in aged care? Well, not necessarily, because one of the things that we're talking with respect to home care is if we structure the delivery of the system better, it may be that there's lower cost. But in aged care specifically, in the residential setting, in the residential aspect, in the residential setting, it may very much be the case that the cost per resident continues to go up, and it has done consistently over many years. In fact, our input into the sector goes up by about $1 billion. Because you're talking about people in need of higher care, you're talking about higher standards. You'd have to be talking about more money. Would it be a bigger government subsidy to make sure it's still affordable, or people will just drop out? Well, that's I think going to be one of the really important things that the Royal Commission talks about, and we've struggled for 20 years in Australia trying to work out who pays for what in the respect of residential aged care in particular. I think that that's going to be one of the very important recommendations that comes out of the Royal Commission as to how we manage as a community to fund aged care.
And you might be fighting for more money?
Well, I suspect that there will be a greater ask for government, but there also might be a greater ask from the community, from people who are going into residential aged care.
Those who can afford it, perhaps.
And those who can afford it, absolutely. So, and we have a range of arrangements in place now, but I suspect that that will be one of the important recommendations coming out of the Royal Commission.